and welcome back to Equine Science Talk International. I'm Kate Farmer. Today we're going to be having a look at some of those cute and crazy behaviours we sometimes see on horses in the videos going around on social media. I love watching those, I must admit. I'm a bit of a sucker for them. And I particularly like thinking about exactly why the horse is doing this. Sure, it's great fun to look at, but what's going on in its mind? And that's what we're going to have a look at today, what's going on behind some of these behaviours. There was a great example recently of a horse that was scratching itself with a rope that had knots tied in it. The rope was hanging on the wall. I don't know if you saw it. Let's have a look at it now together and then we'll have a chat about it. Now we can see the horse here getting its head underneath the rope, and it's having a little bit of difficulty actually getting hold of the rope with its mouth. But it perseveres and eventually it gets there, and then it has a little scratch on its neck. And then it moves down to the withers, which is a very common area for horses to like a nice scratch. I'm sure if you have a horse or you work with horses regularly, you'll know that that's a very common place that they like to be scratched. Then it starts to move back along its back and down towards the hindquarters, which is another big favourite spot for a nice scratch. So this horse is using the rope to scratch areas that he can't reach easily himself while he's just standing in the box. Now, horses usually scratch these areas by rolling or by mutually grooming with another horse. So that led me to the questions, does he maybe have difficulty lying down and standing up, and therefore it's difficult for him to roll in the box? Or does he maybe not have access to other horses that he can groom and scratch with? So I got in touch with the owner and asked her, and she says, no, not at all. He has no trouble lying down and standing up. He does this all the time, and he rolls very happily and very frequently. And she also said that nobody had trained him. They'd just had a short rope hanging in the box, and he'd started trying to scratch with it. So they got him a longer one and tied the knots in, and then he'd started showing the behavior that we've just seen in the video. So the big question now is, does this represent tool use? And does it matter if it does? Well, yes, because tool use is said to indicate a higher level of cognitive functioning, because it's achieving a goal via something outside the horse's own body. So if this does fit the definition of tool use, it tells us something very significant and very important about equine cognition. Now, this next bit is very wordy, so please bear with me. I'm going to have to read it because this is the scientific definition of tool use, and it is the external employment of an unattached environmental object to alter more efficiently the form, position, or condition of another object, another organism, or the user itself, when the user holds or carries the tool during or just prior to use and is responsible for the proper and effective orientation of the tool. Got that? In simple terms, it means using something that isn't part of the horse's body and is not attached to the environment to influence another object. So in general terms, you could say, right, a drinker is not tool use because the drinker is attached to the environment, but a horse using a stick to scratch its belly is tool use because the stick is not attached to anything. The horse picks it up and scratches its belly, as in this example here. So in the light of that definition, we can see that the first example of the horse using the rope to scratch itself doesn't quite come under the definition as described because the rope is attached, it's hanging on the wall. However, the horse is very clearly using the rope in a practical sense as a tool. Now, until very recently, horses were considered not to use tools at all. And then there was a very wide-ranging crowdsourcing project that showed that horses do in fact use tools. A questionnaire was sent out to horse owners and carers who had come forward and said that their horses were showing unusual, innovative, creative type behavior. And 750, or rather just over 750 examples are found of behavior that seemed to be spontaneous and innovative. And within that, there were 13 that the panel of experts considered to be tool use. And in general terms, they found that these fell into one of 4 categories. And here we have a little diagram illustrating that, those different contexts and the ways and the direction of the horse's behavior. So there was one example of the horse using a tool for its own comfort, and that was directed to itself in that first column. Foraging, so looking for food, that was in 4 cases related to the horse itself, and in 2 cases was directed at other horses. We'll see some detail of that in a minute. And in 1 case was directed towards humans. So there were 7 of those in total. There were 4 examples of social contexts, 3 of those relating to other horses, to conspecifics, and 1 of them relating to humans. And finally, there was just 1 example of escape, and that appeared to be directed to humans, to the person responsible for the horse. Now, most of the examples were to do with foraging, feed, and here we can see a horse scraping hay from the other side of the box so that it can reach it more easily. And here I slowed that down a little bit so you can see it a little bit more clearly. And then we have an example of a horse and a mule showing similar behavior. Again, they're scraping the hay out from underneath what appears to be either a stable door or a barn door in much the same way as the first example. Now, while there were only a few examples of exactly this kind of behavior in this study, I rather suspect that this happens more often. So if you see your horse playing around with a stick or a stone on the ground, have a closer look and see what it's actually doing, because maybe it does have a particular end in mind in what it's doing, and that in a sense may mean that it is using whatever it is as a tool. Now let's have a look at another example here. This is related to feeding, but actually it's also a social interaction as well. So the grey horse picks up the feeding bucket and uses it to threaten the horse that's eating out of the green bucket. Then he gets chased back again, and then he has another go. And this isn't really successful either. The horse who's got the green bucket hangs on in there, and he is clearly controlling the situation at the moment. And then the grey horse comes up with a rather better idea. It takes the bucket up high above the eye level of the horse eating from the green bucket, and that sends the other horse back, albeit briefly, but it does send it back. This one I find absolutely fascinating because it relates to the way we behave around our horses. I'm sure a lot of us have been told, and we actually use the practice, that if you want to create space for your horse, you want it to move away from you, you make yourself a little bit bigger. And you might do this with a flag or a horsemanship stick or a paper bag, or even just lifting your hands up is often enough. When you get up high, and the crucial thing here, as far as I'm aware and as far as my experience tells me, is to get above the eye. And if you get above the eye level of the horse and something's moving there, it will tend to back off. And that's exactly what you can see happening in this video. Let's just have another quick look at that last part. It picks up the bucket, waves it, and as soon as it goes up high above the other horse's eye, the other horse steps back. When the horse is no longer bigger, it loses control of the space again. The next one I find absolutely intriguing because I can't work out why the foal is showing this behavior. Let's have a look. It's using a brush, or maybe it's a currycomb, I can't quite see, to groom its mother. Now, the only thing I can think is that it's seen people doing this and it's copying that behavior, because normally it would use its teeth. One horse grooms another horse with its teeth. So for some reason, this foal has come up with the idea of using a brush. So this is clearly about social behavior, but I can't work out what the benefit is to the foal. In the other examples we've seen, there's been a clear benefit to the horse using the tool. And that makes this one fascinating from the cognitive point of view. Why is it using a human tool in a horse social situation? Very interesting indeed. Okay, I've got two more to show you, and these are two that to me are sort of on the borderline as to whether they're tool use or not. The first one shows a horse in the box. It's been on box rest for a few days, and as horses always are when they're on box rest for a while, it's keen to get out. And this is what it does. It's a little bit impatient. It takes the rope off the halter and it takes the halter off and throws it. Now, the panel of experts who were assessing this said that the horse was communicating that it wanted to go out and it was using the halter to show it wanted to be led out of the box. It was associating the halter with being led. I'm not entirely sure about this. I so often see horses throwing things around just because they do, because they're playing, they're bored. It's not that unusual a behaviour, I don't think. If we have another quick look at that, is it really much different from a horse just fiddling? There isn't anything else there it can play with. It plays with the rope and then it throws a halter. I have a hunch it would have thrown anything that happened to be there. I don't think it was necessarily connected with the leading, but that's my opinion. The experts on the study thought differently. What do you think? Now, the last video we're going to have a look at today is one that the experts considered not to be tool use on the basis that the behaviour is trained. And as we can see, that is very clearly the case. So the horse is shown the cookie, the treat, it goes on the ground, and it throws the rope to drag the cookie, the treat, towards itself. It takes a couple of goes to get there, but eventually it gets it.
Good boy.
And it gets not only the treat, it also gets verbal praise from the owner. So that is very clearly trained behaviour. Having said that, the dexterity and the judgment it needs to throw that rope accurately to haul in the treat, that is pretty impressive in itself. But tool use, no, it doesn't really qualify. This is where we've got to be very, very careful and look at these behaviours in the larger context before deciding which category they fall into. That is trained behaviour. A lot of trained behaviour is very impressive to look at, but it doesn't really count as tool use and therefore doesn't necessarily have the implications for the mental functioning, the cognitive functioning of the horse. Well, I hope you found that interesting. I found it fun to go through those videos with you, and I hope you'll join me again next time. Don't forget to check out our video on innovative behaviour in horses. That has a lot of the background to this type of behaviour. And do have a listen to the podcast with Selena Scogan of Equidemia on her podcast channel called Horse Friends. There we talk about the scientific background in tool use. I hope you've enjoyed that. Hope to see you next time. Bye for now.